In 1960, Democratic candidate John F. Kennedy is elected President of the United States. His margin of victory over Republican candidate Richard M. Nixon is just over 100,000 votes. Kennedy wins 300 Electoral College votes to Nixon's 219.
In 1961, President John F. Kennedy issues an executive order establishing the Peace Corps. The Corps aims to disseminate goodwill and practical knowledge by enlisting volunteers, mostly under the age 30, to 2-year terms of service.
May 5th, President John F. Kennedy signs legislation raising the minimum wage in stages from its current $1 per hour to $1.25 per hour.
In 1962, Michael Harrington publishes The Other America, a shocking expose about poverty in the wealthiest nation in the world.
In a speech before the Economic Club of New York, President John Kennedy unveils a plan for economic recovery that emphasizes large tax cuts and credits for businesses.
November 22nd of 1963, President John F. Kennedy is assassinated in Dallas, Texas. Vice President Lyndon Baines Johnson is sworn in as president the same day.
In 1964, in President Lyndon Johnson's first inaugural address, a little over a month after assuming the presidency, he declares war on poverty and outlines an ambitious domestic agenda aimed at reducing unemployment, increasing support for education and job training, and expanding public services for the poor.
President Lyndon Johnson signs the Economic Opportunity Act. In order to combat unemployment and poverty, the act allocates funds for job training, adult education, and loans to small businesses.
President Lyndon Johnson signs the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The act outlaws discrimination in public facilities, such as parks, and in public accommodations, such as hotels and restaurants, and it prohibits employment discrimination on the basis of race, ethnicity, religion, or gender.
Democratic incumbent Lyndon Johnson is elected President of the United States. He defeats Republican Barry Goldwater by the largest margin in American history.
In 1965, President Lyndon Johnson signs the bill creating Medicare, a national health insurance program for the elderly. Companion legislation creates Medicaid, providing health care for people on welfare. Later, Medicaid will be broadened into a more comprehensive program financing health care for low-income persons.
President Lyndon Johnson signs the Higher Education Act, creating the first federally funded college scholarships.
In 1966, United States warplanes begin their bombing raids in North Vietnam. By December of this year, the United States had 385,300 troops stationed in South Vietnam, with 60,000 additional troops offshore and 33,000 in Thailand.
On October 15th, the National Historic Preservation Act is made law. It expanded the National Register of Historic Places to include historic sites of regional, state, and local significance.
In 1967, a 3-day summit between President Lyndon B. Johnson and Soviet Premier Alexei Kosygin, held at Glassboro State College in New Jersey, culminates in a mutual declaration that no crisis between them would lead to war.
On October 2nd, Thurgood Marshall is sworn into office as the first Black Supreme Court Justice.
In 1968, President Johnson announces a slowing to the bombing of North Vietnam, and that would not seek re-election as president.
On April 1st, President Lyndon Johnson signs the Open Housing Act, outlawing discrimination in the sale or rental of most privately owned homes and apartments. In 1969, the Tet Offensive occurred. North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces launched a massive assault on South Vietnamese towns and American outposts.
Astronaut Neil Armstrong sets foot on the moon, fulfilling President John Kennedy's pledge to land a man on the moon by the end of the decade.
On July 25th, President Richard Nixon announces his new Vietnam policy, declaring the Nixon Doctrine that expected Asian allies to care for their own military defense. This policy and all Vietnam War policies would be heavily protested throughout the remainder of the year. On November 15, 1969, more than 250,000 anti-Vietnam War demonstrators marched on Washington, D.C. to peacefully protest the war.